take a look at Brighton now. So we brought you news earlier this month, didn't we, that Newcastle are interested in signing Joao Pedro this summer. Well, today, their head coach, Fabian Hürzeler, told us that he believes both Pedro and Kaoru Mitoma are staying put.
Yeah, for sure. I'm really looking forward for both of them. So they are great players. They helped us the last season. So they're expected to be back next week. We keep doing our way. We continue doing our way with signing young players with big potential, trying to develop them, trying to make the next step with them, and that's what we try to do with these new signings. I'm sure they will make us better. I'm sure that they will integrate us as quick as possible. They have all great characters. They have all great potential. So I'm really looking forward to work with them.
He sounds pretty sure there, Mark. Fabian Hürzeler, he says Pedro's going to stay, wants him to stay, but there's been major developments, hasn't there?
Yeah, some significant news over the course of the last few moments, and it concerns Brighton's Joao Pedro because we understand Newcastle have had an offer rejected, which was worth in excess of £50 million for the Brazilian international. There is long-term interest from Eddie Howe in Joao Pedro. They were interested in him when he was at Watford, but in the end, he joined Brighton. We also know that Newcastle have an interest in Anthony Elanga, and that offer earlier in the window was also rejected. Be interesting to see what Eddie Howe does after this rejection, but very much a player of interest. We know that Chelsea also like Joao Pedro. Get the feeling, might be talking about this man a fair bit over the course of the next few days and weeks.
He's an exciting player to watch, but, OK, 50 million is not enough. How much is?
I think you're probably looking at 60 million plus 5 in add-ons, something like that might be enough to get the deal done. He went from Watford to Brighton and cost 30 million. We know that Brighton drive a hard bargain in the market. They always kind of buy low, sell high, and sell extremely high as well. They'll be looking at him as a Brazilian international, 23 years old. He's just scored and got 16 goals and assists in this last Premier League campaign as well, so his numbers stack up. We know that when there's interest in a player from multiple clubs, particularly in the Premier League, it always suits the selling side because they can drive the price up a little bit more. And despite what Fabian Hürzeler said there, he's not going anywhere. He's looking forward to seeing him in pre-season. I would be gobsmacked if Joao Pedro stayed at Brighton beyond this summer.
OK, James, when you see a player that reaches double figures for goals and assists combined, that's pretty impressive. How big of a loss would he be to Brighton?
I think it would be a huge loss to Brighton, but when they signed him from Watford for £30 million, as Mark was saying there, I think there's always an acceptance and a knowledge that over the course of the next few years, he'd develop into becoming a world-class player and would perhaps depart one day. I think they'd have loved to have got one more season from him. I think last season was slightly more disappointing than his first campaign. He scored 20 goals in all competitions when Brighton were in the Europa League the season before last. But last season there were a few injury issues. There was a disciplinary issue at the end of last season as well. So just 10 Premier League goals. And when you look at the options they have there right now, Brighton, they do have some decent forward options. Evan Ferguson will return from West Ham. You've got Danny Welbeck, but he turns 35 in November, and they've signed a new player in the form of Chalampas Kostulas for £30 million, a teenager. We wait to see what impact he has this season. They've got the likes of Jorginho Ruta, who's not out-and-out number 9, but can play in that area of the pitch. So there are options there. I think Brighton know, and it's part of the recruitment model, they're signing these players knowing perhaps that one day they'll move on to bigger and better things. That's the way Brighton are. That's the model they have right now. And when you look at the notable sales, you can understand why they were able to sell the dream of Brighton to a player like Joao Pedro, because these are the types of clubs you can go to. You can go to Chelsea, Liverpool, Arsenal, Tottenham, clubs that are fighting for Europe, clubs that are fighting for major silverware and challenging to win the Premier League every season. That's what you can move to if you succeed at Brighton. But Brighton are only willing to sell when it works for them. But I think when you consider this here, they wouldn't be able to get the likes of Joao Pedro if they weren't able to say to him, if a club meets your valuation at the right time for us and it works for you, then we'll let you move on. And it does feel like it's the right time for Joao Pedro to move on with that concrete interest there. Brighton, I think, would have loved to see him a little bit closer to his peak, despite having 2 really good seasons.
I think the thing to point out as well, Brighton sell players for a lot of money, but you don't want to get the reputation of only being able to leave a club for big money. So they need to get that balance right between getting what they want for a player, but not saying to other clubs, hang on, we can't take you to Brighton as a player because actually it's really difficult to get you out because they want big money. So it's about getting that balance right between selling something that you want, but but also getting a player out there for fair market value, because otherwise you get the reputation, don't go to Brighton because it's really difficult to get you out of Brighton because they only want big money for you. So that's where they're treading that fine line. But the business they've done has been absolutely exceptional. It's one of the best run clubs in the Premier League. The people that are there operating Brighton and Hove Albion are sensational at what they do, and they're very much the model for not just Premier League sides, but every team in the world is looking at what they do going, right, how can we be like Brighton, because they're so good at what they do.
OK, so as you say, Brighton in recent years, they buy cheap and they sell big. But if you look at their recent transfer signings, is perhaps that changing? Are they shifting their model slightly?
Well, I think last season in particular, they changed their model just slightly. That's what they had to do because it was a big summer in terms of recruitment. Jorginho Ruta costing £40 million from Leeds. I think last season was an exception rather than what we'll expect to see from Brighton.
Right.
The difficulty is you can't sign players like Alexis McAllister for £5 million anymore because of what Brighton have done over the course of the last few seasons. I think 2 or 3 years ago, or 4 or 5 years ago, it was easy to sign the likes of Moises Caicedo and Alexis McAllister for really short fees. Whereas now, these clubs are seeing what you're selling the likes of Moises Caicedo for, more than £100 million. So these clubs aren't able to... They're not going to let them go for as low as we've seen before. So that's why you're seeing slightly more pricier signings over the course of the last few seasons. But Brighton, their model isn't going to change. Their model won't change. They'll sign players young with very little experience for very low fees. They'll also sign players slightly more expensive with slightly more experience. And then they'll sign players for very limited fees, the likes of James Milner, Adam Lallana. They'll still do that, the likes of Danny Welbeck, when it makes sense to the club. But they're not going to change too much, though it's very difficult to get these players as cheap as before because these clubs that are selling the likes of Caicedo and Alexis McAllister know what Brighton are doing for these players and knowing the sort of money they're recouping in a couple of years' time.
Yeah, and so far for Brighton, it's working, isn't it? OK, we'll be on Pedro watch over the coming days to see if he does remain a Brighton player.